He thought it would be just another quiet trip into the Montana woods, but everything changed the moment his German shepherd stopped walking. The dog's ears lifted, his body froze, and in that single second, the man knew something was terribly wrong. A deep, heavy sound echoed between the trees, far too close to be normal. Before he could react, his loyal companion, the only friend who had stood by him through war and loneliness, suddenly lunged forward as if trying to shield him from something still hidden in the shadows. Then the forest erupted. Branches snapped, the ground trembled, and something enormous stepped out into the fading light. What happened next would test loyalty, courage, and the silent bond between a man and the one soul who had never abandoned him. If you believe loyalty still exists and that miracles happen in the darkest moments, then you cannot miss this story. Please subscribe, share this video, and leave a comment so this message of hope can reach someone who truly needs it. Thank you for being here, and may God bless you and your loved ones. Late autumn settled heavily over the mountains of Montana, covering the vast wilderness in a muted palette of ochre, rust, and dying green. The air was sharp, carrying the bite of early frost even though winter had not yet fully arrived. Clouds hung low, drifting like slow gray ships over the jagged peaks. A thin veil of mist lingered between pine trunks and over the small river that wound past the clearing. The nearest town, Pine Ridge, a remote settlement with fewer than 2,000 people, lay nearly 20 miles away, separated from Jack Miller's cabin by winding dirt roads, patches of forest thick enough to swallow sound, and long stretches of lonely terrain where the only movement came from deer or wind sweeping through brittle grass. It was a harsh environment to live in, but also honest, peaceful, and mercilessly quiet. Exactly what a man like Jack sought after leaving behind a world that had been far louder, far crueler. Jack Miller, who had turned 38 that past spring, lived alone in a weather-worn wooden cabin at the edge of a sloped pine forest. He stood around 6'1", broad-shouldered with the unmistakable build of a former Marine, arms veined and strong from years of labor, chest solid, back straight despite past injuries. His face carried angular lines sharpened by both wind and memory, a square jaw masked by a short, rough beard the color of dark sand, deep-set hazel eyes that always seemed to watch and calculate, and a faint scar running from his left temple to just above his cheekbone, a reminder from his final deployment. His short brown hair had begun to show scattered strands of gray, though the quiet life in Montana had softened some of the hard tension usually coiled in a soldier's posture. Even so, there was something in the way he moved, measured, alert, deliberate, that revealed he had once lived through days where every sound mattered. Jack's personality had been shaped by two worlds, the structured brutality of war and the silent resilience of solitude. He wasn't unfriendly, but he had withdrawn from people, choosing distance over discomfort. Most locals knew him as the quiet Marine living by the ridge, someone who nodded politely in town but rarely stayed long enough to chat. Years of losing comrades, followed by long nights of replaying moments he wished he could change, had left him guarded. But he wasn't bitter. Instead, he carried a gentle protectiveness, a quiet kindness reserved for the one companion who had stayed through everything, his German shepherd, Rex. Rex was 4 years old, large even by the breed standards, with black and tan fur thick enough to withstand the freezing Montana winters. His ears stood alert, his eyes intelligent and warm with that unwavering loyalty German shepherds were loved for. Muscle rippled under his coat, yet his movements were graceful, his breathing steady, and his expression calm unless danger approached. He had been assigned to Jack years earlier when Jack served in the Marine Corps K-9 unit. Although Rex had technically completed his service, his instincts had never dulled. He listened to the forest the same way Jack did, every rustle, every shift of air, every broken pine needle underfoot. Their morning began the same way it had for months. Jack pushed open the creaking cabin door and stepped into the chilled air, his breath coming out in small clouds. Rex followed closely, tail swaying, nose twitching as he scanned the clearing. Jack walked toward the woodpile beside the cabin, his boots crunching over frost-kissed leaves, then hefted his axe, a heavy, reliable tool with a worn wooden handle that fit his calloused hand perfectly. He set a log upright and swung. The crack echoed across the clearing. Rex lay nearby, watching with half-closed eyes, occasionally lifting his head when birds fluttered past or when the wind shifted direction. Jack paused and leaned on the axe handle, taking in the landscape. Some people might find the silence unsettling, but to him, it was healing. Every sound out here was honest. The whisper of the river, the creak of trees swaying under their own weight, the distant cry of an eagle. Nothing felt false. Nothing felt staged. After too many years surrounded by noise that meant danger, this quiet was the closest thing to safety he had ever known. Inside the cabin, life was simple. The interior smelled of cedar and old smoke. A cast-iron stove warmed the small living space, and shelves Jack had built himself held tools, a few books, and jars of dried herbs. The walls displayed nothing except a framed American flag and a small photograph of Jack's old Marine unit, men smiling despite their exhaustion. Rex, still a pup in that picture, sat at Jack's feet with oversized ears and wide, eager eyes. Jack kept the photo not out of nostalgia, but as a reminder of who he had been and how far life had carried him. After splitting enough wood for the day, Jack and Rex walked down to the river. The water ran slow but icy, clear enough to reveal smooth stones at the bottom. Jack cast his fishing line with the kind of practiced ease that came from repetition. Rex sat beside him, occasionally dipping his paw in the water and jerking back from the cold. Jack chuckled softly, the sound rare but genuine. While waiting for a bite, Jack spoke in the low, steady tone he reserved only for Rex. "Storm's coming soon," he murmured. "We'll need to check the roof tomorrow. Maybe patch the north wall too. Winter's creeping in early this year." Rex turned his head toward Jack, as if understanding. Jack reached down and scratched behind his ears, feeling the warmth of his companion's fur against fingers numb from cold. "Good boy," he said quietly. These small moments, fishing by the river, chopping wood, repairing the cabin, sharing meals, had become their rhythm, a rhythm that healed Jack more than he would ever admit aloud. He had never imagined himself living a quiet life like this. But after his final deployment ended in chaos and loss, he found he needed a place where nothing exploded except firewood, and nothing chased him except memories that softened with time. By afternoon, the sky darkened with thickening clouds, and Jack decided to head back toward the cabin. Rex trotted alongside him, nudging Jack's hand occasionally, as though checking that he was still there. When they reached the cabin, Jack lit the stove, prepared a simple meal, and sat in his wooden chair as Rex curled beside the fire. They listened to the wind pressing against the cabin walls, a steady reminder that nature here was both friend and foe. As night fell over the Montana wilderness, Jack looked at Rex and felt a wave of gratitude, quiet but profound. They had survived war, loneliness, and the uncertain years that followed. Out here, in a world that asked for nothing except respect, their bond had grown into something unbreakable. Neither needed words to understand the other. The silence of the forest, the crackle of the fire, and the steady companionship of a loyal dog were enough. Tonight felt no different, no more significant than any other night, though Jack didn't know that soon everything would change. Soon a threat lurking in the forest would test their bond more fiercely than any battlefield ever had. But for now, this was peace. This was home. And Jack clung to it with the quiet hope that tomorrow would be just as gentle. The next afternoon arrived with a deceptive gentleness. The sky over the Montana wilderness stretched wide and blue, carrying only a few thin clouds drifting lazily across the sun. Autumn light filtered through the pine canopy, turning the forest floor into shifting patterns of gold and shadow. The air, though crisp, felt milder than the previous day, the kind of cold that brushed the skin without biting deeply. Jack Miller stepped out of his cabin with Rex at his side, both prepared for a routine trip into the woods. Jack carried an old but reliable hunting rifle slung across his back, its metal scratched and darkened from years of service. He also held a canvas sack for dry firewood. Rex trotted ahead with alert but relaxed ears, the calm confidence of a German shepherd who knew every inch of the surrounding forest. Jack walked with the steady, purposeful gait of a man used to assessing terrain. Yet today he felt unusually light. Maybe it was the clear weather, or the way sunlight warmed the tops of the pines. As they moved deeper into the forest, the familiar crunch of needles under Jack's boots mingled with the rhythmic sound of Rex's steps. The breeze carried the earthy scent of moss, damp bark, and distant mountain water. For Jack, it was the kind of afternoon that felt safe, ordinary, predictable. He had no reason to expect danger. They followed a narrow path between large rocks blanketed in green lichen. Rex paused occasionally to sniff the air or inspect claw marks on trees, old ones Jack recognized from past seasons when bears roamed through earlier in the year. But today, even these signs felt routine. Jack knelt beside a fallen pine trunk and began breaking off dry branches, stacking them neatly in his sack. Rex stayed close, his tail swinging slowly as he scanned the tree line. As they continued walking, the forest thickened. The sunlight thinned to soft strips filtering through branches. The temperature dropped slightly, letting Jack know they were approaching the deeper, older part of the woods where the canopy grew dense. Here, sounds were muted. Bird calls muffled, wind swallowed, footsteps softened. Jack didn't mind the quiet. He had lived in worse silence before. After a mile of steady walking, Rex stiffened suddenly. His ears pricked sharply forward, his muscles tightening beneath his coat. Jack noticed immediately. He trusted Rex's instincts. They had saved him more than once, both in foreign deserts and in the quiet danger of American wilderness. Jack slowed his pace, scanning the ground. That was when he saw it. Prints in the soft earth. Large, heavy, and deep. Much fresher than any they'd seen earlier that season. Jack crouched, inspecting the tracks. They were unmistakably from a large animal, wider and deeper than wolf tracks, longer stride, and the front paw impressions slightly offset. But what mattered most was the crispness of the edges. Fresh. Hours old at most. Jack frowned, brushing dirt off his fingers. "Big one passed through," he murmured. He didn't feel immediate panic. Bears occasionally roamed these woods, and most avoided humans unless provoked. But he didn't dismiss Rex's tension either. A moment later, a figure appeared a short distance away. emerging from behind a cluster of trees. It was Ethan Turner, a local hunter Jack had met only twice in Pine Ridge. Ethan was in his mid-40s, tall but lean, with a wiry frame built from long hikes and field work. His face was rugged, marked by deep lines around the eyes and mouth, and his short black beard streaked with gray framed a mouth that rarely smiled. His eyes, a sharp blue, carried the watchfulness of someone who had lived through hard seasons, both in nature and in life. Ethan had lost his wife 3 years earlier in a highway accident, something that left him quieter, more serious than most men in town. He wore a faded brown jacket, battered hiking boots, and a bright orange vest for visibility. A hunting bow hung over his shoulder, and a leather quiver hugged his back. His presence startled Rex for only a second before the dog recognized him and relaxed slightly. Ethan lifted a hand in greeting. "Jack," he said in a gravelly voice softened by cold air. "Didn't expect to see you this far in today." Jack nodded. "Looking for dry wood? Maybe a bit of venison for dinner if we're lucky?" Ethan's gaze dropped to the fresh tracks near Jack's feet. His jaw tightened. "You should be careful. Big grizzly's been moving through here. I spotted it earlier toward the ridge. Looked agitated. Might be hungry." Jack exhaled slowly. He respected Ethan's judgment. Few men in Pine Ridge knew the forest as well. Rex growled softly, sensing the shift in mood. "We'll keep our distance," Jack said. Ethan nodded, though concern lingered in his eyes. "Stay sharp. I'm heading south. If you hear anything strange, don't investigate alone." His expression softened a fraction. "Good dog you've got. Trust him." "Always do," Jack replied. Ethan disappeared into the trees with quiet, purposeful steps. Jack looked down at Rex, whose fur bristled almost imperceptibly. "We'll only gather what we need," Jack murmured. The dog seemed to agree. They continued deeper into the forest. Rex walked closer now, occasionally brushing against Jack's leg. The air thickened, the silence growing heavier. They passed another set of fresh claw marks on a fallen log, this time deeper. Rex sniffed, then let out a sharp, troubled whine Jack had heard only a handful of times. Jack's instincts stirred uneasily. Something wasn't right in these woods today. The forest no longer felt peaceful. It felt watched. Still, unaware of how close danger truly was, Jack pressed forward, determined to gather enough supplies before dusk. What he didn't know, couldn't yet know, was that these fresh signs were not warnings of a passing animal. They were signs of a predator circling back, restless and hungry. And he and Rex were walking straight toward it. The forest had fallen into an unnatural silence as Jack and Rex moved deeper among the towering pines. The afternoon sun, once bright and warm, had dimmed behind a growing layer of clouds. The air thickened, almost metallic, as if holding its breath. Jack bent to gather a final bundle of dry branches, his hands steady, but his instincts tightening with each passing minute. Rex stayed close, his steps slow and tense. Even without words, Jack felt the shift in his companion's energy, a warning far more reliable than anything written in survival manuals. He had just secured the last branch into his canvas sack when Rex suddenly froze. The dog's muscles tightened beneath his thick black and tan coat, ears thrust forward, every hair along his spine rising like bristles. A deep, guttural growl rumbled from Rex's chest, low at first, then sharper, louder. Jack straightened instantly. He trusted Rex's senses more than his own. "Easy, boy," Jack whispered, though his voice carried none of its usual calm. He scanned their surroundings but saw nothing except dark trunks, low ferns, and silent undergrowth. Then he heard it, a heavy crack of wood, followed by the sound of something enormous moving through the brush. The ground beneath his boots seemed to tremble. A shape emerged through the shadowed pines, huge and lumbering at first, then terrifyingly clear as it stepped into a patch of gray light. A grizzly bear. Massive, towering close to 3 meters when it reared back, its fur thick and coarse, soaked in autumn damp. Its shoulders rolled with raw muscle, and deep scars crossed its flank. Signs of past battles that proved it had survived more than one season as a dominant predator. Its eyes, small and ember red, locked onto Jack with a mix of hunger and irritation, as if the mere presence of man and dog had trespassed on a territory it fiercely guarded. Jack's breath hitched. He stepped back, lifting his hands slightly, keeping his movements slow. He knew bears reacted to sudden motion. He also knew backing away might help, if done early enough. But he had no such luxury now. The bear huffed, puffing steam into the cold air, its chest expanding like a bellows. Rex moved before Jack could stop him. The German shepherd lunged forward, hackles high, barking with explosive fury. Rex was large for his breed, strong and battle-tested, but compared to the bear, he looked impossibly small. Still, he faced the beast without hesitation. "Rex, no, stay!" Jack shouted, but it was too late. The bear swung its massive head toward Rex, irritated by the noise. Rex darted closer, snapping at its legs, barking sharply, trying to draw its attention away from Jack. The bear roared, the sound echoing so violently through the forest that birds burst from nearby branches in panicked flight. Jack's heart slammed against his ribs, his stomach tightening as the scene unfolded too fast to control. Rex was quick, trained for combat situations, disciplined under fire. He dodged the bear's first paw strike, a blow strong enough to break a man's spine. Dirt and leaves exploded where the paw landed. Rex snapped again, landing a bite on the bear's lower leg, not enough to injure, but enough to distract. The bear lunged. Rex leapt sideways, but the beast's claws grazed his flank. Rex yelped, a sound that tore through Jack more savagely than any battlefield noise he'd ever heard. Panic surged through him, raw and overwhelming. He dropped his sack of wood and sprinted forward before instinct caught up with him. He had no weapon drawn, no plan, no defense against something so colossal. "Rex, come back." Jack's voice cracked, but the dog didn't retreat. Instead, Rex ran deeper into the forest, forcing the bear to follow. The shepherd weaved between trees, using his speed to stay just ahead of the raging predator. The bear thundered after him, breaking branches, shaking the earth with each step, pushing deeper into the darkened woods. Jack chased them, tearing through brush and leaping over fallen logs. His breath burned in his lungs, each inhale sharp with cold. He could barely track Rex's movement, only flashes of tan fur, the snapping of branches, the monstrous bellow of the grizzly as it tried to catch the dog that dared defy it. "Rex, hold on," Jack shouted again, but his voice was swallowed by the chaos of trees cracking and the bear's snarls. They reached a slope slick with pine needles. Jack skidded but kept running, branches whipping his arms and face. Rex's barking grew sharper, more frantic. Jack's vision blurred from sweat and fear. He had seen men die, had heard cries on battlefields, but nothing. Nothing had ever made him feel as powerless as hearing Rex's desperate sounds ahead of him. The chase drove them into a darker, older part of the forest, where sunlight barely pierced through. The ground was uneven, dotted with stumps, twisted roots, and patches of rotting leaves. Jack stumbled, caught himself, and pressed on, adrenaline overriding pain. His hands trembled, not from exhaustion, but from terror of losing the one companion who had stood by him through war and solitude. Then Jack saw it. Rex cornered between two large fallen trunks, the bear closing in, towering over him. Rex snarled one last time, defiant even when overshadowed by a predator 10 times his size. Jack drew his rifle with shaking hands, trying to steady his breath long enough to aim, but the distance was too far, and the bear too close to Rex. One wrong shot could kill his own dog. "Please, Rex, move!" Jack pleaded, voice breaking. The bear raised itself, roaring so loudly the forest itself seemed to recoil. Jack's vision narrowed, his pulse pounding in his ears, and before he could decide whether to shoot or scream, the chapter of their peace ended, marked by the terrifying truth that Rex had risked everything to save him. The fight was far from over, and Jack was running out of time. Jack reached the fallen trunks just as the grizzly towered over Rex, its massive frame blocking what little light filtered through the old-growth pines. The air was thick with the animal's musky scent, its breath turning into pale bursts of steam in the cold dusk. Rex, though cornered, still bared his teeth, his black and tan fur bristling, his eyes blazing with the same unbreakable loyalty that had seen him through military chaos and countless drills. His body trembled, either from pain or fearlessness. It was impossible to tell. The bear lunged. Its enormous paw swung with brutal force, striking Rex and sending him crashing into a moss-covered tree trunk. The impact shook the ground beneath Jack's boots. Rex let out a short, strangled cry before going still, his body slumping to the forest floor. Jack felt something in him crack, a familiar fracture of helplessness he had sworn he would never feel again after witnessing comrades fall one by one in distant deserts. "Rex!" His voice tore from his throat as he sprinted toward the dog, but the bear turned sharply, roaring in challenge. Jack skidded to a halt, breath coming in ragged bursts. He could see blood matting the fur along Rex's flank from where the claws had grazed him earlier. Jack's instincts clawed at him. Somewhere deep inside, he was back on the battlefield, running toward gunfire, toward collapsing buildings, toward everything a sane man would flee. His pulse pounded like artillery, but he didn't retreat. Instead, he swung his rifle off his shoulder, hands trembling, adrenaline fighting panic. The bear reared again, its roar shaking loose a few pine needles overhead. Jack raised the rifle, but he couldn't get a clean shot. Rex lay too close, one wrong angle risking the very life he was trying to save. The bear roared, lowering its weight, preparing to charge. Jack swallowed hard, bracing himself. There was no time to aim for a vital point, and he didn't need to kill it. He only needed to drive it away. Jack fired into the air, the sound exploding through the forest like a lightning strike. The bear jerked at the noise, startled. Jack quickly fired again, louder, sharper, forcing the sound to echo between the trees. The grizzly huffed, stomped the ground, and swung its head from Rex to Jack, its small red eyes glaring with confused rage. "Get away!" Jack shouted, firing a third time. The bear flinched, but didn't flee. Instead, it stepped backward with heavy, reluctant movements, unwilling to turn its back, but unwilling to tolerate the booming blasts either. Finally, with a deep growl that vibrated in Jack's bones, the bear retreated into the shadows between the ancient pines, crashing through brush until its steps faded entirely. Jack didn't breathe until the forest swallowed the last sound. Then he dropped to his knees beside Rex, the rifle slipping from his grasp and falling uselessly into the dirt. "Rex, buddy, come on," Jack whispered, voice breaking. He placed a shaking hand on the dog's chest. Relief flooded him when he felt faint, fragile breathing beneath his palm. Rex's body was limp, his fur damp with blood and pine sap, but life still clung to him stubbornly, just like the dog always had. Jack's vision blurred. Tears, real, heavy ones, ran down his cheeks and onto Rex's fur. It was a raw collapse of emotion he had never allowed himself in front of people. He had held dying Marines in his arms, had watched friends fall, had learned to swallow grief like fire. But this was different. This was family. This was the last piece of his world he couldn't bear to lose. "Stay with me," Jack whispered, voice hoarse. "I've got you. I swear I've got you." With trembling hands, he pulled open his emergency pouch, using a ripped bandana and a strip of cotton gauze to wrap Rex's wounded side. Blood seeped through quickly, but the pressure slowed it. Jack worked with grim precision, old battlefield habits returning with cruel ease. He checked Rex's breathing, his pupils, the rise and fall of his ribcage, weak but alive. Night began to settle faster than he wanted. The temperature dropped sharply, the sky fading to a cold, metallic blue. If they didn't move soon, Rex wouldn't survive the cold, much less the wounds. Jack slipped his arms under Rex's body and lifted him, grunting at the weight. Rex was large and muscular, nearly 80 pounds, normally easy enough to manage, but tonight Jack's exhaustion and panic made his limbs feel heavy as stone. Still, he hoisted Rex securely against his chest. The dog's head rested limply against Jack's shoulder, warm breath hitting Jack's neck in faint pulses. "I'm taking you home," Jack murmured. "We're not done yet. Not tonight." He began the long trek back through the thick forest. The path was uneven, roots threatening to trip him, rocks shifting beneath his boots. Every sound made him flinch. A distant crack, a branch falling, the rustle of wind, each one a reminder that the bear could return. But Jack pushed forward relentlessly, fueled by desperation rather than strength. Hours later, long after the sky turned black and frost began forming on fallen leaves, Jack emerged from the tree line and saw the faint outline of his cabin. He stumbled across the clearing, kicked open the door, and gently lowered Rex onto the rug near the stove. Jack immediately lit a fire, wrapped Rex in blankets, and applied fresh bandages with careful, practiced movements. Rex let out a weak whine, eyes fluttering open for a second before closing again. That small sound broke Jack all over again, but it also filled him with a fierce hope. "You're gonna be okay," Jack whispered, sitting beside Rex and keeping one hand on his fur. "I promise. I'm right here." Outside, the night wind howled across the Montana wilderness, but inside the cabin, the fire crackled softly, marking the fragile line they had crossed between death and survival. The days that followed blurred into a quiet, relentless rhythm inside Jack's cabin. The Montana wilderness outside grew colder, the early signs of winter creeping in through frosted windows and thin drafts beneath the door. Each morning, pale sunlight pushed weakly across the snow-dusted clearing, illuminating the small wooden home where Jack Miller had placed every part of his focus on a single mission: keeping Rex alive. Rex lay on a thick bed of blankets near the wood stove, his black and tan fur carefully cleaned and brushed each day to keep infection away from the healing wounds along his flank. The dog was still weak, his movements slow, his breaths shallow at times, but his eyes were open, following Jack with a softness that held 1,000 memories. Rex had survived battlefields, training grounds, and long miles in scorching deserts, But the grizzly's blow had nearly taken everything from him. Jack barely slept. He moved through the cabin with the quiet determination of a man who had patched up wounded friends in far worse conditions. His movements were methodical, checking Rex's breathing, replacing bandages, warming broth over the stove, and spooning it into Rex's mouth when he was strong enough to swallow. The fire never went out. Jack fed it wood the moment it dipped low, refusing to let the cabin's warmth falter even for a minute. Occasionally he stepped outside to gather more wood, but never far, always staying within earshot of Rex. Each time he returned, the dog's ears twitched, a faint acknowledgement that Jack was back. Those small signs, one lifted ear, a slow blink, a weak tail wag, meant everything. On the third morning, snow began falling heavily, muffling sound across the clearing. As Jack chopped firewood, he spotted a figure approaching through the trees. For a moment, instinct made him tense, fear of the bear's return tightening his muscles, but soon he recognized the man's gait and posture. It was Ethan Turner, the local hunter they'd met days earlier. Ethan's appearance was dusted with snowflakes, clinging to his dark beard and the folds of his worn brown jacket. His face, naturally rugged and deeply lined, seemed even more tired in the cold light. Despite his usual stoic nature, there was concern etched in his blue eyes. "You're a hard man to catch at home," Ethan said as he reached the clearing, voice low and gruff. He carried a small leather satchel slung over one shoulder. Jack nodded, resting the axe against a stump. "Didn't expect visitors." Ethan glanced toward the cabin's window, where Rex's silhouette was faintly visible. "Heard some gunshots the other day. Figured it wasn't for sport." Jack hesitated, but there was no point hiding anything from someone who knew the woods better than most. "Grizzly got too close. Rex saved me. Nearly died for it." Ethan exhaled slowly, understanding deepening in his expression. "Good dog," he murmured. "Stronger than most men I know." Then he handed over the satchel. "Herbal salves. My late wife used to make them. Good for swelling, infection, pain. Might help him pull through faster." Jack accepted the satchel with a quiet gratitude. Ethan's wife, Marlene, had been known in Pine Ridge for her kindness and healing knowledge. After she passed, Ethan had become a quieter, lonelier man, carrying grief like an old scar. Jack understood that weight all too well. "Thank you," Jack said sincerely. Ethan nodded once. "If you need help tracking that grizzly, let me know. A bear that aggressive shouldn't be wandering close to people." Jack's jaw tensed, memory flashing of Rex slammed into the tree, the roar, the helplessness. But his voice stayed controlled. "Right now I'm focused on getting Rex back on his feet." Ethan offered a rare, fleeting half-smile. "Take care of him. Dogs like that, they come once in a lifetime." With that, he turned and disappeared into the swirling snow. Jack brought the salves inside, warming them near the stove and applying them carefully to Rex's wounds. The dog shivered at first, then relaxed into the warmth of Jack's touch. Hours passed, then another day and another. Slowly, Rex's breathing grew stronger. His eyes stayed open longer. He lifted his head without help. Eventually, he managed to stand, unsteady, shaky, but alive. Jack was kneeling beside him when it happened. Rex pushed his nose into Jack's hand, eyes soft and trusting. Jack felt his throat tighten. "You scared the life out of me," he whispered. "But you stayed. You fought." The memories of the grizzly's attack crashed over him again. Not the violence, but the sacrifice. Rex had thrown himself into danger without hesitation. He had done what a soldier would do for a fellow soldier, for family. Jack rested his forehead against Rex's, a gesture he had never allowed himself before. "I won't let you face something like that alone again," he said, voice trembling with conviction. "You're not just a dog. You're my partner, my family. I swear I'll protect you the way you protected me." Days later, when the snow cleared and Rex was strong enough to walk outside, Jack opened the cabin door. The cold air brushed against them, crisp and clean. Rex stepped forward, still limping, but with determination. Jack stood beside him, one hand resting gently on Rex's back. Together they looked out at the vast Montana forest, the same forest that had nearly taken Rex's life, the same wild land that had become both sanctuary and battleground. But now, as they stood shoulder to shoulder, it no longer felt threatening. It felt like a testament to everything they had endured and everything they had become together. Jack exhaled deeply. "Whatever comes next," he murmured, "we face it as one." Rex leaned into him, quiet and steady. And for the first time since the attack, Jack felt whole again. Sometimes God's miracles don't arrive with thunder, angels, or glowing light. Sometimes they come in the form of a loyal friend with 4 paws, a beating heart, and the courage to stand between us and the darkest moments of our lives. Jack thought he had lost everything after war: peace, trust, purpose. But God sent Rex not just as a dog, but as a reminder that love still protects, loyalty still lives, and miracles still walk beside us every day. And when Rex risked his life for Jack, it wasn't just bravery. It was grace. It was a message. A quiet whisper from above. "You are not alone. I am with you. This bond is my gift to you." In our own lives, too, we often walk through deep valleys: illness, loneliness, heartbreak, fears we cannot speak out loud. But sometimes, God places someone or something on our path to remind us that hope still breathes. A friend, a child, a stranger, a loyal pet. A moment of unexpected kindness. Miracles are everywhere, if our hearts are willing to see them. So if this story touched you, inspired you, or reminded you of the love and protection God has placed in your life, please share this story with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment about the miracle in your life, someone God used to protect or guide you. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel so more hearts can be lifted, more souls encouraged, and more people reminded that God still works through love. May God bless you, your family, and every loyal friend who walks beside you. Today, tomorrow, and always.